Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Circling Seattle Sports on Converge Media. I am your one of your two hosts, as always. Now, Charles Hamaker, joined by Bel. How you doing, Bel?
I'm doing well. How are you?
So we're getting back to cold season. Not a big fan of that, but we have a much busier sports week, as you said before we started this.
We do. So, first, we're going to start with recapping some key players for the Seahawks. We're just going to go down the line here. Chuck and I will both give our opinions as to who we think had key impacts at this season.
So before we jump into the players, I want to just take a quick look at the season here. Finished with a 7-10 record, fourth NFC West. You're the only team in the NFC West to not make the playoffs. So 7-10 isn't the end of the world, but it could have been better, right? Obviously, it's been outside of that, not wanting to finish in the basement, right, of the division.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, I guess one thing, if you want to look at the silver linings, three of the other teams in the division made the playoffs, right? One of them is currently playing right now. The other two play tomorrow. So, I mean, the NFC West is never an easy division, right? So, as you were saying, we're going to look into our season recap here. MVP, we both ended up with Tyler Lockett. Why did Tyler Lockett stick out to you as the team MVP?
For me, it was his consistency. He did finish off with 1,175 passing yards, and I thought that was significant in the season. And again, consistency.
Consistency is a big part of it. Part of why I had Tyler in that spot was because you have Russell, who really wasn't fully healthy for, I'd say, 90% of the season. Because I mean, he was back, but he wasn't himself. And to, like you said, to have over 1,000 yards in a season where your quarterback really isn't there all the time, that's pretty good. And it's, as a guy who was drafted as a kick returner to still be this presence, and as the years go on, of a steady wide receiver, for him to do that in a year like this, I think consistency is a good word to hammer on there. As we switch over to Offensive Player of the Year, I stuck with Tyler Lockett, but Bel had somebody else. Bel, do you want to talk about your selection there?
Yeah. So I went with Rashad Penny because I was, again, really impressed with the second half of the season. He finished the last 3 games with at least 135 rushing yards and a touchdown. And I think it just brightened the end of the season, even though, of course, they broke their 9 consecutive seasons with a winning record. It gives hope for what's to come.
Albeit not to be the guy who puts in a little bit of you still got to sign him to a contract.
Yes,
you still got to see that through. But to your point, he is somebody who said he wants to be back in Seattle. Seattle's home of sorts, right? The only reason I didn't have him in that category, because obviously you make a key point, 130 plus yards in all of those games, and to do so not only against like the Bears and the Lions, whatever, could throw that away.
Yeah.
Cardinals are no easy team, and they've kind of been a pesky, annoying team for as long as the Seahawks have had like a Pete Carroll and a Russell Wilson. I didn't pick him simply because it wasn't because compared to Tyler, it wasn't a full season thing, right? But I totally understand that, because I figure normally every year you could give it to Russell, maybe, but that I can't do that. Ultimately his numbers weren't horrible. I mean, I think 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, not bad, but when I look at the season, I don't think of like the best player on the field being Russell Wilson, as has been in past seasons, right?
It wasn't a Russ-like performance for sure.
No. Yeah. So we look over to Defensive Player of the Year. I had Jordan Brooks, but I want you to talk about DJ Reid.
Yes.
That is your pick.
It was. So I did DJ Reid because he started the season on the left side. In week 4, he got moved to a more comfortable position on the right side of the field. And since that move, he surrendered no touchdowns and ended the season with a pair of interceptions.
And has really kind of become the main cornerback here in Seattle. I mean, the guy that not a typical Pete Carroll cornerback, being 5'9", usually it's a little bit taller of a guy.
Yes.
We look at, if we're going to keep it in tune with what's going around in the NFL. Trey Flowers with the Bengals now moving on in the playoffs, 5'11" and up, former safety. DJ Reed's really kind of fit the mold here well. After being picked up off of waivers from San Francisco. I think that's a good pick. I just went with Jordan Brooks simply because of Jordan Brooks' consistency. Every week that we had the show going, it was either him or Bobby Wagner leading in tackles. I think Jamal Adams snuck in there maybe once, but it was always him or Jordan. And I know that Bobby is I'm sure he's a little bit upset about it, but Jordan, breaks the record that Bobby Wagner set a week ago for all-time lead tackles in a season and then tackles in a game in that Week 18 matchup against the Cardinals. So, for him to do that all in his second year, it only tells you about the ceiling, I feel like, and we're still going on. Second year, but not only that, but you've got Bobby Wagner teaching you. So I feel like that's where I stood with Jordan Brooks, a guy who isn't like making the big plays. Everybody wants to see interceptions and big hits and fumbles. Just consistently there, consistently having that impact. That's why I had Jordan Brooks. As we look to Rookie of the Year, we had a unanimous pick here. How about you talk about Trey Brown?
We went with Trey Brown. I went with Trey Brown specifically just because I saw a big improvement as a rookie. There was a key point for me in Week 10 against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. He was able to break Aaron Rodgers' pass to Allen Lazard for a turnover on downs. And that's an impressive thing to do when you're battling to try to score, because that game wasn't a good offensive performance for the Seahawks. So the defense was out there a lot of the time.
So a lot of your guys are going to get exposed a lot more when your offense is struggling. And like you were talking about, as a rookie to come in there and play, you're playing Aaron Rodgers too. You would know about Aaron Rodgers. It's no easy task. To go up against a quarterback like that and you're a rookie is like, okay, I'm playing against a rookie today. We're going to go at him. So for him to come in and have as much of an impact as he did, it sucks that he wasn't able to finish out the season. But again, to talk about like we did with Jordan Brooks, it's exciting to look forward to going into next year. Comeback Player of the Year should be obvious for multiple reasons. Rashad, do you have anything else? I know we talked about him as your Offensive Player of the Year, but is there anything else you want to talk about with Rashad?
No, I think overall just he was very impressive trying to fit a role that belonged to Chris Carson. And yeah, that was the biggest key signifier.
I know that we're going to talk about both of those guys down the road here, but it is interesting to think about, right? 130-plus yards with a line that kind of middle of the pack. Got to wonder if maybe you've got some controversy there, or maybe just splitting some carries going into next season. But certainly, I think it's a good problem to have, also, albeit when that contract is signed for Penny. Best signing, there wasn't too much, kind of similar to the rookies, and that's not playing down Trey Brown, but there wasn't a big batch to go off of for free agents. But Gerald Everett have our unanimous pick. What's your piece on Everett?
Everett, I think, is doing a good job as a tight end. He only had 7 targets inside of the 20-yard line, but out of those 7, he was able to convert 3 of those into points for the Seahawks. So.
And I know he had, I think it was the Niners game here at home where he had like a fumble and several drops and just had a really bad game. But outside of that, he did what he was asked to do. We didn't see as much of a Sean McVay offense as we were kind of teased about all offseason. But I think he came in and he did what he needed to do. The only problem is he was signed to a 1-year deal. So I think Seattle would want him back. It's just if he wants to be back. But I think Everett kind of got a little bit more hate than he should have. I think he filled in a pretty good role in his time here. And I think towards the end of the season, he was like the leading receiver several times. Not against Arizona, but like several times he was a leading guy. Game of the year, we're split here. It makes sense to me, but what made Week 14, the win at Houston, stick out as opposed to like maybe Detroit where you score 50 points?
For me, again, it was Rashad Penny's presence. And this was the game where he broke out and scored 2 touchdowns and had, I think it was 137 rushing yards. Yeah. So this was the beginning of Rashad Penny, and it was also a dominant performance by the Seahawks, which you would assume is obvious against a Houston Texans team that's struggling. But again, just being able to identify that someone's going to have such a big role moving forward, I think that's important.
Yeah, that's the resurgence of Rashad there, I guess, for you is your sticking point. And that makes sense. Yeah, because it's kind of like, hey, what is this? Like, is this a apparition or is this real? And then just kind of continued over the course of the next few weeks. I had a tough point because, when you think of a game of the year, it's like it's a really tight game that has significance to me, right? Like a playoff game, like a clinch the playoff situation. Or, it's like the most complete game. You could look at Houston, you could look at Detroit, you drop 50 points. I looked at Arizona just because, you kind of looked maybe the best all year against a good opponent. You stop Arizona from winning the NFC West title. And I always like beating Arizona. So that is why I picked Week 18 to win at Arizona. Biggest issue to address. It seems like these are both offensive issues. I want you to talk about Russell and his love-hate relationship with his offensive line.
Yes. So Russell is really good at scrambling, and I know that he can find his guys doing so, but I think that it would be way better for the offense if Russ had a lot more time in the pocket to try to let the play go out, read it, and then, of course, make his pass.
And I think that's something that we should look at potentially next week is like free agency, or just something that we need to look at, right? Free agency, who you want to target, who to bring back, because, we talked about free agents, a topic ago or two, and didn't mention that there weren't that many signings, right? Ethan Postich was a guy that we re-signed. I would want to move on from that because if you want to keep Russell Wilson happy, for one, you want to give him time in the pocket. You want to keep those rushing lanes open for a Rashad Penny or a Chris Carson. You need like average to above average guys at basically all the positions. You look at some of the best lines in the league, like a Green Bay, like in Indianapolis. They have guys all along the league who they may not be like great. They're not all Pro Bowl caliber, but they work well. They got good chemistry with their other guys on the line, and they are all like at least average guys. We talk about Indianapolis. Mike Lewinsky, their right guard, is actually a former Seahawk. So I understand that too, and I would like to see Seattle get a new center and a new right tackle. But that's just more importance on free agency. My biggest issue this past season was inability to adjust. If Russell Wilson, he's not healthy, you got to be able to give him like easy passes, right? Quick stuff. Just don't try to make him do moon balls like that. You talked about that game against Green Bay, right?
Right.
Poor offensive performance. One of the first few weeks, I think it was the first week off of injured reserve.
It was.
And you got to give him stuff that's easy, stuff that are layups. You got to get him in rhythm. It just didn't really feel like the offense was able to do that the first few weeks. And even before the injury, you got to be able to adjust off of what the other team gives you. You can't leave your defense out there for long periods of time. So as we look at it, it's a really head-scratching season, right? Because you had some good performances, but ultimately not at all where you wanted to be. What are you looking forward to next season, the 2022-2023 season, obviously after hopefully a successful offseason?
Continuing to think that Tyler Lockett and Metcalf are going to excel at their roles. I think that Chris Carson coming back is going to be a key part of the offense. But you can also see different variations. So it could be Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, like you said, splitting the touches, or even just moving forward with a Rashad Penny. Russell Wilson will have options for passing and for rushing, and I think that's an exciting thing to look forward to.
I think that's a good point you bring, is balance, right? Because you can have the greatest wide receivers and the greatest quarterback there is, but if a defense is ultimately able to hone in on that, you got to be able to run the ball.
Right.
And I'm not saying, maybe the Pete Carroll side of things where you want to run the ball, And as someone who grew up around here, I mean, the Huskies tend to run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
My high school tends to run the ball. So I'm used to running the ball, but balance is such a huge thing. You don't want to get one-dimensional. So I think, having a good balance is so key to having a good offense and keeping your defense off the field.
Oh, yeah.
I look forward to, another year Russell Wilson. I know that we're going to touch on it here in a second, but you guys know me. I don't touch on the rumor stuff. And as Jordan Brooks, I wasn't entirely sure about the selection. I was more mad at Rashad Penny's pick simply because it was a running back at the time. And I was like, we don't need another running back. Hindsight, this and that.
Yeah.
But Jordan Brooks was kind of a question mark for me. And, to be in his second year and to lead the league, I don't believe he led the league, but to set records in tackles in a season by a second-year guy, that's a big deal. And I think that'll only get better with more time around Bobby Wagner, and just his natural development. So just to take a quick look back here, all of the topics: most valuable player, offensive player, defensive player, rookie of the year, comeback player, best signing, and then game of the year. As we wrap up our season in review here, we move over to some injury stuff. Quandre Diggs out 4 to 5 months officially. I think we talked about that last week, kind of a 4-month time frame. Had successful surgery on his broken fibula and dislocated ankle. But now the big thing is contract. So, I mean, if I'm asking you, not to say, I don't know, if I'm asking for a definite answer, do you think we're looking at an extension here for Quandre Diggs, hopefully this offseason? Because, I mean, he's a free agent now. And how many years would you, if I put you in John Schneider's chair, how many years are you giving a Quandre Diggs?
I would say that I would give him at least 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was, honestly, for Defensive Player of the Year, it was hard not to want to pick Quandre because of his performance this season. So I think you keep him around. I also think that it varies depending on what Russell does. Of course, the chips fall around him, so he will be key in determining who stays, I think.
Yeah, because there was supposed to be a big meeting with Jody Allen, now, the sister of Paul Allen, now owner of the Seahawks, Pete Carroll, and John Schneider. I guess it happened, but there's no definitive statement, so I'm assuming we're running it back, which has become kind of the mantra of the Seahawks Twitter, is running it back. And I'm assuming Russell's going to be here, all the comments at the end of the year, right? But yeah, I mean, unless we got to figure that out, put this on the table, figure out what's going on, because then we're able to finally address this off season. You're looking at $44 million in cap space. So yeah, I think 2 to 2. I'm thinking like 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
3 may be comfortable most for Quandre, but it's not like you don't have the resources right now. It's just about, there's some key guys you need to bring back. I think a DJ Reid is in there as well. So there's some key things to address contract-wise. Looking into team notes, middle linebacker Bobby Wagner earns second-team All-Pro honors. It is his 8th consecutive season with All-Pro honors. And linebacker Jordan Brooks did receive 1 All-Pro vote. Quandre Diggs receiving none, which is a little bit of a surprise there. Adrian Peterson is going to reportedly later consider coaching. He says he's not ready to retire quite yet, but his time in Seattle has kind of shined a light on the potential for that. And so that might be interesting, but ultimately, obviously we're not in his camp, so we don't know everything, but I have to feel like it's a year or 2 left for AP. I mean, last season he played with us for
was it a game?
I think it was a game. I think it was the Niners game. He
Yeah.
scored a touchdown, and then it was the back issue that held him out. It was cut by Tennessee. He played with Washington a year or 2 ago. I got to think you're running out of options here, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there's much more of a stick to go off of here. I don't know if there's much more of a journey for him to take.
You can't bounce around forever.
No, and especially, it's not like you're playing a Madden franchise. You're not aging, right? He's getting older.
Yeah.
And as much as he is AP, the value is going down, I'm sure. Backup quarterback Geno Smith was arrested early Monday morning for driving under the influence. Smith was reportedly going 96 miles per hour and refused a breathalyzer test prior to his arrest. Smith did tweet out after the arrest that there is more to the story than just the headline, so that is something to monitor. But we did get the details about going 96 miles per hour or refusing a breathalyzer, so there's more to the story than that. Mm-hmm. I know that Smith was at the team meeting, the day after, but Pete Carroll wouldn't comment more than that.
Yeah, so I think he really is asking for sympathy just because, again, like you said, we don't know the whole situation yet. So he's just asking us to keep an open mind, and hopefully he fills us in soon.
Yeah, because, as when an athlete gets in something like that, obviously I feel like there can be the two sides of the coin, right? Because quick media wants to get out, oh, Geno Smith was arrested. What was he doing?
Yep.
But also there's the side of it as, oh, maybe there was a misunderstanding, right? So that'll be something to monitor. I'm not going to take any sides here. I'm just going to let it play out. And then, as we addressed earlier, today, at around 5 a.m., the first headline came out that Russell Wilson reportedly wants to explore his options. Wilson has not demanded a trade officially, but is curious if outside of Seattle may put him in a better position to win. I'm just going to ask you this, Bel. Are we buying into any of this?
No. I think there was some rumors going around last offseason, that he was not happy. And of course, we saw him play another season with Seattle. There are other rumors going around that maybe he'll be in the NFC in the North. So I don't know if I buy into those. I don't think that it's a recipe for winning just yet, but I guess we'll keep an open mind as well here and not sway one way or another, because you never know.
Well, I sway one way. I don't buy this stuff. I mean, I haven't since last offseason, so I'm going to go with what Russell was saying at the end of the year. I want to win more Super Bowls, and I'm going to do it here in Seattle. Okay. All of that talk, I'm buying into that, not whatever report comes from Ian Rappaport or whatever. Russell's got 2 years on his contract left. He's not going to be traded unless the team wants to.
Right.
And ultimately, if you're in the general manager chair, right, it's how do I equate his value, right? Because if you still want to contend and all that, you're not trying to tear everything down and rebuild. You got to think, okay, I need a quarterback if I trade mine, right? So there's a lot more that goes into it. Just, Russell's unhappy. There's so many more aspects to it. So until Russell Wilson puts his claim in and says, I want to be traded from the Seattle Seahawks, not buying it.
And we hope that does not happen.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, exactly. Just a small thing on league news. Former Seahawks running back Marshawn Lynch reportedly is in consideration to join the new Thursday Night Football staff. Amazon, who is now taking over Thursday Night Football, is reportedly considering the former Seahawks running back to be part of a studio show for Thursday Night Football next season. I know Marshawn was on the Manning cast on Monday Night Football. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't.
Used some vulgarities. Marshawn's always a treasure to have around. And it's interesting to see him be a little bit more involved with things like media, with commercials. Because, when he was here, we can go down the list of memorable quotes.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting to see. I don't know if he would do a studio show, because I'm sure especially Amazon, would want to keep the swearing to a minimum. But it's interesting to see. And he's certainly a personality. He's not like he's just some boring guy, right? He's a personality, and I think that's why Amazon wants him. Whether or not he agrees to that, to be seen. Just a quick note on the Mariners here. The Mariners signed a few international prospects. Now, we're still in the MLB lockout, and I'll address that in a second. But because they're not major league contracts, the Mariners can still do so. The Mariners signed the number 8, number 41, and number 48 international prospects. Those in order being Lazaro Montes, Michael Arroyo, and Martin Gonzalez. So much more in baseball going on than just here in the U.S. A lot going on in the U.S. properties internationally. So the league notes on the lockout is that the MLB and the Players Association met on Thursday right? People got their hopes up, me being one of them. In order to get some, I believe the league itself was going to put some offers on the table. The players' reaction to the proposal was not good. And so we are still at square one and still really have no idea where we're going to be as we approach February. And early February is when pitchers and catchers are supposed to report. Supposed to. So ultimately, we will see how that goes. But right now, we're still in uncharted waters, still kind of doggy paddling through the mess here. As we head over to our storm, and I'll let Bel guide us through that.
So, unfortunately, our tweets regarding Sue Bird's return were cause for a fine. Of course, everyone was excited to have her back, but it looks like some of those tweets were a little premature.
I guess it's considered tampering, but it's like, is Sue Bird going to sign somewhere else that's not Seattle, especially at this part of her career?
I wouldn't say so. They have also chosen to core guard Jewell Loyd. That would mean that she could be back on a 1-year Supermax contract. Of course, it doesn't guarantee anything. She can sign a multi-year deal with Seattle or be traded still. So a little bit of uncertainty there. What do you think this is headed towards?
See, like we talked about before, unlike Breanna Stewart, who said she wants to be back in Seattle, having Sue Bird would help with that. So Sue Bird coming back, and we've got this notion that unless something happens, she's going to be back with Seattle. So Stewie, again, not worried about. Jewell Loyd, not entirely sure, because at the end of the season, after that loss to Phoenix, in the first round, Jewell Loyd said, I have to look at things. I have to talk with my family. I talk to my friends and see what I want to do. Mm-hmm. That's an indefinite answer. Right. And, as we have looked at it, right, I don't know if we talked about it last week with Jewell Loyd reposting an Instagram story from a housing agent, congratulations on your new house. But in the back of that photo, the letters Chicago were all spelled out. That's not a good sign, considering that it could just be a second house. It could be Loyd having a home in Chicago where she's from, right? But also as a Chicago Sky, Candace Parker winning the WNBA title last year, wanting to run it back. Uncertain. But funny enough, I do have somewhat of a source here. I have someone who spoke with Jewell Loyd just yesterday, actually, at the Kraken game here in Seattle with some of her teammates, including Mercedes Russell, was asked about being cored and said that she does want to be in Seattle. That could mean, Jewell Loyd is going to, since she's been cored, as you mentioned, going to work out a long-term deal, right? Or at least maybe 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
It could just be her talking to somebody and saying something while her heart is somewhere else. But I'd like to be optimistic about it. But ultimately, if you're asking me to give you a definitive answer and stop dancing around the question, I'm going to lean towards maybe playing out the Supermax deal. I'm going to lean towards that because maybe she wants to reassess, see how things go, because it is Sue Bird's last season, right? And I'm sure the Storm are going to try to reload and just go all out because you want to win a title, put her out on top, right? This may be, hey, I'm here for the ride. Let's help Birdie get out of this. And then, hey, maybe I'm done. I've won 2-3 titles here in Seattle. I'm done, right?
And maybe that's enough time for her to reevaluate where she is in a year as well. So a 1-year Supermax doesn't sound like the worst scenario. Of course, we'd love to have her for longer, but just like you mentioned, luckily we know that Sue is coming back, and we know that Stewie has every intention to come back. With that being said, we do have a couple areas that we would need to fill roles in.
Especially since I think you've got 3 to 4 players on contract currently.
Right. Yeah, it's a very slim list. So we have a couple centers as an option here. We have Tina Charles, Liz Cambage, who would be absolute monsters as centers. I think that would really round out the team. But of course, we're also looking at forwards here. What role do you think we need to address first?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. You know, we look at center, right? You've got Ezi Magbagor, who's young, really young, and has been growing. But to have a really dominant person in the paint would be really big for this team. Because, okay, we look at, again, if we're going with this preconceived notion that the big three comes back.
Yes.
If, you know, fingers crossed and all. You've got Birdie at the point, Jewell at the 2, Stewie at 3, perhaps. Maybe if we're running the 2 double forward look, put Katie Lou at the 4, or you could probably switch Katie Lou at the 3, Stewie at the 4. There was a lot of, I mean, if you were to insert a Tina Charles, who led the league in scoring for a good amount of last year at the center position, that is another threat there. Because Stewie can score from wherever, Jewell can score from wherever, Birdie's one of the best, I think she's an assist leader, all-time assist leader in WNBA history, so can distribute the ball. And then you've got a big woman inside who can, it just gives you another aspect.
Right.
So I think that puts you in, if you were to sign either of those ladies, Tina Charles or Liz Cambage, I think that puts you in as a favorite. Obviously, Vegas is still good. Chicago still got Candace Parker. But either of those women is huge, right? So I would say getting a big woman is a big deal, but also with whatever moves you make at the 5 starting positions, you still need a bench because every championship team needs a bench. So ultimately, though, I think if you're able to sign a big name center, that's a big deal.
I read that Tina Charles was interested in winning an WNBA title, of course. And why not come do it with the big 3? It seems like a pretty good, like I said, well-rounded team. So hopefully we do get some interest from some big names like that. And would the big 3 turn into a big 4?
I think that would. And I mean, come and play in a really high-tech arena, come and play in Seattle. Excuse me. I've heard nothing but good things from people who have played here. And if the arena was able to partially, partially convince Sue Bird to be back, I think it's something that people are going to want to play in. And I'm interested to hear what players think about Climate Pledge Arena from the WNBA, because I've heard players from the NHL who have come to Seattle said, hey, this is a really nice barn. Barn is a word they use for arenas in hockey, which is new to me. I spoke with Philip Grubauer, and he said, oh, this is one of the nicest barns in North America. I'm like, we're not in a farm. But one of the nicer barns in North America. So if they're going to say that, you can only wonder about the WNBA side. And I'm interested to hear about that as well. But yeah, I think you bring up some key point, a big 4. I don't see why not. I mean, there's a lot of talent in this league. But we'll have to see. I mean, free agency is currently officially underway. So we'll have, I'm sure by the time next week we're here, we'll probably have something to talk about. As we move into our Sounders here, who last week, a little quiet, right? But this week, quite busy as we head over to the Sounders news. The Sounders added 4 key players new to the roster here. We will go through order of how they were added, but 4 new key players. The Mls Super Draft took place last week. The Sounders initially had the 20th overall pick, but would on the actual pick timer would trade out to the New York Red Bulls for the 43rd overall pick and $75,000 in allocation money. With that 43rd overall pick, Seattle would select UW defender Akil Robin. Robin is a defender center back out of France, previously playing 3 seasons with Bowling Green until transferring into UW with the 76th overall, pick. The Sounders would select Seattle U midfielder Hal Uderitz. So you kind of notice their UW player, Seattle U player. The last time the Sounders did that, it was the Roldan brothers and Christian Roldan out of UW and Alex Roldan out of Seattle U. So keeping it local. Also keeping with the local flavor here, the Sounders would sign UW midfielder Dylan Tevez to a homegrown player contract. That is a big deal, not only because Tevez played for the Sounders, as a youth a youth player earlier on. He was offered a chance to play for the Sounders instead of going to college, but he went to UW instead. Local kid out of, well, not local kid, but coming out of Hawaii. Tevez was ranked the number 2 overall player in the country in men's soccer last season. So you add instant talent right there in your own backyard. Why not, right? Signs a 4-year deal, includes 3 option years. Decided to wear the number 99 because it reminds him of his number 9 that he wore in college. 99 just, when it's not football, it feels really weird to me. Because baseball, I know Manny Ramirez wore it with the Dodgers, but just a big number.
It
right?
is, yeah.
He has completed his degree in finance from the UW Foster School of Business already, obtaining his degree 2 quarters early. So doesn't have to worry about any more college stuff. I still have to do that. But that's it. I feel like that's, you talk about the Sounders, you talk about going to the playoffs every year. They don't do it by just getting instant fixes. I mean, Tevez may make an impact this year, as we saw the Sounders deal with some injuries last season and some international call-ups. So we more than likely will see him on the pitch at some point this season. But this is only a guy who's going to get better, I feel like.
Right.
And then the fourth, the biggest name that we've been talking to you about for past 2 weeks, the Sounders officially signed Albert Rusnak to a 2-year deal with a 3rd option on the 13th of January. Seattle made the news official. Last year, 11 goals, 11 assists in the regular season. Real Salt Lake, Rusnak's former team, reportedly did not offer him a new contract, which is interesting considering had such a well-balanced season. So just looking at that, before we even get into the players that we're retaining, out of the guys you've got on contract, you keep most of your core, right? But to add, at least if we're not going to look at the draft, because those guys are relatively unknown, the draft doesn't always mean the most in MLS. Yeah. You sign a guy who scores 11 goals and assists on 11 of them, and you add the number 2 player in the country. I mean, as somebody, as someone from, living here, I mean, what do you think about that? Because you've got your knowledge in basketball and football, but if you were to take that, you think about, a team that, like the Patriots, were to add the number 2 player in college and sign a key free agent. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I was completely surprised when you said that he wasn't offered a new contract, because I'm reading that this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, signing in the MLS. He's going to be a key contribution. Do you think there will be much adjusting to him joining the Sounders?
Maybe on a chemistry point, just because, you're coming into a team that knows each other well, right? This is a Sounders group that the core has been around for a while. Christian Roldan's been around for a while. Stefan Fry's been around for a while. So a lot of guys that already know each other. So maybe on that point, get to know each other.
Sure.
But in terms of play style, I would say no, just because Nico Ladero, a guy who's been so valuable to this team last year dealing with injury, really couldn't get his feet under him. They play a very similar style. So I think, on that aspect, no, but obviously, new guy, new team.
Different chemistry. Yeah.
That'll be there, and that'll be there to work on. I know that they had their first official preseason training on Friday. So you got some time to build on it, right? But you've got, a 2-year deal with a 3rd-year option. I think it's only good, yeah, because like you talk about it, this is one of the bigger free agency signings in the MLS, a guy who's all-star caliber, coming to Seattle, who Seattle's been relatively a juggernaut, and so with that news, about those 4 being added to the team, we have some players coming back. Alex Roldan officially coming back on a 3-year contract that's fully guaranteed. Stefan Cleveland, the backup goalkeeper, has re-signed, a guy who had to start several games with Stefan Fry out due to injury. So a guy who's young, may one day usurp Stefan Fry. Has got talent, has got experience under his belt. My apologies. And then everybody else, we've got some other players who are not official. Will Bruin working on a contract with him, but it sounds like he'll be good. I've got sources on Montero and Rowe that they're, basically they're already at training on Friday, so it sounds like deals might be done already and haven't been officially announced yet. and or they're working on them. And then two of the bigger pieces, Rivalry Diaz, who you just saw on your screen, guy who was near the top of the MLS in goals scored, led the Sounders in goals scored, is your all-time postseason goal scorer for this team. Talk about him has been kind of rampant over the offseason, whether he'll be back. Maybe he's done with Seattle. Reportedly close on an extension. We may hear about that next week officially. And then João Paulo, guy who was a finalist for the MVP award in the league last season. He is also close on an extension, but I have been told that is a deal that is good as done. So think about though, like we just talked about with adding Rusnak, you retain, out of the 18 players that you saw the most last year, you retain 16 of them, and then you add an all-star caliber in Rusnak, and you add the number 2 player in college. It's got to just look like a return to, getting to MLS Cup, right? Because 2 years ago, in the COVID season, Seattle goes and plays Columbus Crew, loses that game, unfortunately. Last season, bounced in the first round. So you got to think we might see a return to grace, no?
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask that if it's too early to be thinking about some title dreams here.
Title dreams? No. I mean, because this is, again, we're in a really lucky position here with the Sounders, not only the Sounders, but with other soccer as well. They've made the playoffs every year in their MLS inception. I say that because the Sounders did exist before the MLS. Making the playoffs every year, having a culture that people want to be a part of. Rusnak's old coach, head coach at Real Salt Lake, left Real Salt Lake in the middle of the season to join the Sounders as an assistant coach.
Yes.
So what does that tell you, right? And then Rusnak said, me and my family, the best decision was to be in Seattle. So it just, if you look at successful franchises, a good front office is always at the base of that. It doesn't matter if we're just talking about soccer. It goes to the other sports as well. And that's what the Sounders have. So is it too early to think about playoff, title aspirations? I don't think it is, because, Seattle, 2 MLS Cup titles, just a few years ago in 19 or so, you win your title in your own building. And the next year you go to the championship, you lose it. But to be in the mix all the time, I don't think there's going to be anything different related to that. Just a smaller piece of news, the Sounders traded Jake Morris. Don't worry, not Jordan Morris. I know Jay Morris, relatively similar. Jake Morris, the center back, was traded to Columbus, just got done talking about, for $50,000 in general allocation money. So not the biggest deal, as Morris spent a lot of time with Tacoma Defiance. But still of note, I would say. Allocation money can be used for a number of things. So something to note there. For the Sounders, looking ahead, we've still got some offseason, but mostly we're getting into preseason training. Their next game is not until February 17th. So we'll keep you updated as that goes. And I imagine by the time we speak to you next week, we'll have official deals set up for João Paulo and Rivalry Diaz. Moving over to our Kraken here, things, we're just talking about playoffs and titles, and then we've got our...
Can I say it?
Say what?
What's Kraken?
Okay. Adding some humor there. I got even a chuckle out of someone. Terrible. We look at our... What's Kraken? 9-game losing streak. That's what's Kraken.
That's not good.
The Kraken played 3 games over the past week, 2 of them on the road. The first of those being January 12th at Dallas, losing that game 2-5. My player of the game, Jared McCann, a goal, an assist, 2 points. Goal and assist, being part of the 2 goals that your team scored. January 13th at St. Louis, losing that game 1-2. I had Alex Wenberg, 1 goal, 1 point, being the guy who contributed the only goal in that game. January 15th, wrapping up the week against the LA Kings, losing that game 1-3. Player of the game, Marcus Johansson, with 1 goal, 1 point, being the guy who scored the only goal there for Seattle. But you'll notice there, I want you to look at, you see those 2 games. You've got close games, right? I mean, 1-2 loss to St. Louis, who you'll see here next week. St. Louis is not a bad team whatsoever. And then you've got, LA, who's played relatively well. Seattle played a really tight game with them, and it would have been a 1-2 game had not been the open net goal at the end of the game. So Seattle's, they're competitive with a lot of these teams. It's just, I know I said this to Bel before we walked into the building today. What Captain Mark Giordano said after the December 31st loss to Calgary continues to ring true, is that this team continues to lose games in new ways, finding new ways to lose. So it's tough. It's tough out here. But I have to repeat, this is to be expected with an expansion side. Just the little things, like that game to the Kings. The Kings got those two first goals off of rebounds. Chris Drieger made good saves, hit him right in the chest or hit him off his blocker, and then the puck lands right in front of an LA King, who's able to just tuck it in there.
And you did mention that was towards the end of the game there, right? So it was a tight game for most of the time?
Yeah, because the first one came relatively early, but then the second one came around later in the second period, and then the third goal to really put it away was like with 30 seconds left. So it was a tight game. But the issue with playing a tight game like that against LA is that LA is made for that. They can sit there and park the bus, grind you along the boards, and really just kind of essentially just sit on the ball. You know what I mean? On the puck. So it's tough, and I get it, and I get the frustration. But I mean, again, this is not Vegas. This is a completely different situation, and we're going to continue to have these struggles until when? I can't tell you. If you want to look so far into the offseason, the Kraken will have a good amount of cap space, so you can look there. But this is a team that they stay in games. It's not like they're losing every game 7-0. It could be worse ultimately. We're still not the worst team in the league, so there's something there. But it is an experience. Like I was saying to you earlier today, they just finished up their new introduction package, so and there are some tickets available. So it's. I'd say if you have the opportunity to get in the building, I would do so, because it is a cool building, one, but also this is NHL hockey in Seattle for the first time ever.
Right.
There has been other hockey variations in history in Seattle, so don't say, oh, we're a hockey town now. They've been around. I don't want to have to go over hockey history. But I would say, you've got a pro team, make the most of it, because we could be, tell me right now, this week, what other pro teams are playing?
No one.
Exactly. So we could be in this awkward position where we were in past years, where it's like, oh, the Seahawks are out of the playoffs. Mariners spring training is coming up. Sounders coming up. We've got something to look at right now. So I'd say, I guess, be happy about that. In injury news, this got reported today. Backup goaltender Chris Drieger was placed in COVID protocol just a day after he started. Antoine Bibeau will back up Philip Grubauer until Drieger is out of protocol. Bibeau is being recalled from the Allen Americans of the AHL, which is interesting because normally it would go to Joey Decord, who we've seen earlier in the year when Drieger's been out. But because of travel issues, we will not see Decord. Kind of an interesting story I want to share. My friend RJ, who also reports on the Kraken, mentioned that their practice today, that the media thought Drieger was out there at practice on the ice today. But the helmet was taken off of the goaltender, and it was the goaltender coach. They thought it was Drieger. They thought he played like him and everything, just maybe slow here and there. And until they saw him take the helmet off, and he was balding without a beard. Chris Drieger has a pretty prominent beard. So it's kind of a funny story to think, oh, he's out there, and then you take him out. It's the goalie coach. What the hell? But yeah, ultimately, it could be worse for our Kraken, outside of the corny jokes that my co-host made.
I had to.
In team-related news, alternate captain Jordan Eberle was voted to the 2022 All-Star Game, so Ebbs will be the Kraken representative here in the All-Star Game. I know that there are a few spots open, so Mark Giordano, your captain, is available to be voted in. If you want to go vote for the captain, go ahead. I know, he's kind of a guy who's a little bit up there in age, but has had a successful career. He's your captain for obvious reasons, just because he's the oldest guy, and, he filled the captain spot in Calgary. But Jared McCann, I think, has been playing a relatively good spot. good season, and I think he could take one of those spots. But
aren't those always the guys that we want to be named as all-stars, the ones that have had successful careers and they're kind of just hitting the end there and you want to see them
like a pity vote? Or are you more saying it's kind of like a respect?
It's kind of like a respect thing, yeah.
I get that. But so I wouldn't be surprised then if we saw Giordano make it, if we see Gio get voted in, but we'll probably hear about that in the next week. So with that being said, we hope to see the end of a 9-game losing streak. The Kraken sit at a 10-win, 23-loss, 4 overtime loss record, totaling in 24 points still. We have not moved up in that category in points over the last week. Sitting 8th in the Pacific Division still, with their next set of games, 4 more games as we continue the 6-game homestand. The first one being January 17th versus the Chicago Blackhawks with a 2 p.m. puck drop on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The next game being January 20th versus the San Jose Sharks with a 7 p.m. puck drop, getting back to the relatively standard time. January 21st on a back-to-back there against the St. Louis Blues with another 7 p.m. puck drop. And then January 23rd playing the Florida Panthers at 6 p.m. Florida previously beating them, one of the top teams in the league, beating them on the road down in Florida, which is, to use that terminology, again, one of the tougher barns to play in around the league. So hopefully by the time we speak to you next week, we're not on a 13-game losing streak. In case you need to know, and I just hope we don't have to even consider it, the longest losing streak in NHL history is 19 games. That was set last year by Buffalo. So let's not get anywhere closer to that, huh? As we look into our OL rain here, the rain picking up. I know the last few weeks it's been relatively quiet for our ladies who now play back in Seattle once again. In team-related news, Alana Cook, Sophia Huerta, Rose Lavelle were all called into the U.S. Women's National Team January camp. It is the first national team camp of this year, lasting from the 19th to the 28th, so that's starting off relatively soon here. And then we get into some of the more interesting things. The Reign obtained the rights to Alyssa Melanson, from the North Carolina Courage. The Reign would trade the rights to midfielder Frankie Tagliaferri to North Carolina in exchange for Melanson. Melanson was drafted technically last season, but declined the draft to go back into college to play the final year of her eligibility. Melanson won SEC Defender of the Year, United Soccer Coach's first team All-Southeast region, and second team All-American in 2020-21. So I guess that was a pretty good bet to have on yourself, right? So acquiring a mid defender there. And then in the other trade that the Reign made over the past season, the Reign acquired forward Veronica Latsko from the Houston Dash and then would sign her through the 2023 season. Latsko acquired via trade with Houston in exchange for the Reign's natural third-round pick in next year's draft and $30,000 in allocation money. The other little piece of team news is that 3 younger Reign players are called into the U.S. Women's National Team's U23 camp. Same camp as, same time frame as that prior camp that has Huerta and Lavelle and Cook. But it'll be goalkeepers Laura Ivory and Claudia Dickey and defender Alyssa Melanson, who was just acquired. So interesting to look at here. You know, the Reign, Laura Harvey's always making moves, always relatively active. We look at it here, you know, the Reign make it to get us the second seed last season, right? Get a home playoff game, fall to Washington, who eventually wins the title. You keep the key players in this team. Jess Fishlock, the MVP, Bethany Balser, Megan Rapinoe, Lauren Barnes. You know, you got a lot of the key players still here. I think the only players that Seattle lost of note were Kristen McNabb and Danny Weatherholt via the expansion draft. So, again, we talk about the Sounders and their consistency. The Reign haven't had necessarily that, but I would say last season's a good indicator. You know, you got so much talent in this team, and they really gelled. It was a really tough year with the scandals that took place around the league. Obviously still dealing with the pandemic, but this team was really able to rally together. I remember after the Washington game, I asked Megan Rapinoe, what are your thoughts on this group as a whole, being able to rally from being bottom of the table and then coming all the way up to second place. And she said it was a really special group, one of the better groups she's been a part of. And that's saying something, a woman who's been involved with, so much success in her career. If I have to ask you again about expectations, knowing what you do from last season and then knowing that you keep a good amount of the core group, the Reign have never won a title, like an NWSL championship. They've won the Shield a few times, which is fine and all. Regular season's great. But ultimately, you play to win titles, right? You play to win trophies. Do you have any expectation, I would say, looking into preseason, as preseason starts on February 1st?
I mean, you always hope to get better in the off season. So hopefully, like you said, the team chemistry, the way they gel, it's all kind of being brought back, it sounds like, based on them bringing back a lot of the same players. So hopefully these new additions can come in, gel just as easily, and they can place even higher than they did last year.
Yeah, and that's something, it's funny because, I'm sure you know about it. The Seattle-Portland rivalry is a big thing, whether it's Sounders and Timbers, and it still rings true in the NWSL. The Reign were the number 2 seed this year, who was number 1, but Portland. And Portland always seems to have a good team. They have been like the benchmark of success in the NWSL for a decent amount of time. So yeah, I mean, you'd obviously like to get better in the offseason. You draft some forward, and some midfielders. I know Olivia van der Yat from Washington was selected, so that's cool just because it's a local. Mm-hmm. But you got to wonder too, as we are still a few weeks out from preseason, if the parent club, Olympique Lyon, may lend some of their players like they did last season with Eugenie Le Sommer and Jennifer Marazon. I'm sure we'll see some of them loaned to the Reign, and it'll be interesting to see, because I know, like we've seen with the trades here, Laura Harvey doesn't seem to be complacent with just the same people all the time. So that'll be something to note. But much busier week this week than perhaps last season. I mean, last week, pardon me. You got the Storm, Jewell Loyd. That's a big deal. How that plays out, we'll probably hear more of that as WNBA free agency has begun. The Seahawks kind of done for a bit. I'm sure we want to address some free agents, so I think we'll do that next week. The Sounders, a busy week, and I'm sure they'll be even busier and like I said, we were talking about some more contracts. The Kraken, 9-game losing streak. That's all I got to tell you, really. And the Reign making some more moves and gearing up for preseason. So with that being said, how are you feeling? I mean, second week in the chair now, you have the audacity to make some jokes. You got a chuckle out of Salman. How are you feeling in the chair?
I think you knew the joke was coming, but I'm glad to be back for a second week, and I only look forward to this continuing. Thank you for having me as a co-host.
Well, hopefully our teams can win games going forward, and we don't have to worry about a Seahawks losing season and, the Kraken continuing to suck. But no, it's always fun to look at this. I think it's always good to recap it because not only do you get to get a second view at it, but also now you get a second pair of eyes and a second mind to think about it, more input, a different viewpoint. So with that being said, this is your episode of Circling Seattle Sports on Converge Media for the week of January 17th. Tomorrow, because we're recording this on Sunday.
No, I'm saying about look at the wire.
Oh, yes. Trying to think. I mean, there's not necessarily that much that's happening next week outside of the Kraken playing their games. So, as always, thank your directors. Salman coming in on a day that's not our normal recording day. If you're out there and you appreciate your directors, give your directors a good round of applause there. And until then, stay warm. Again, maybe it's just me, but cold season. Take care of yourself, be well, and we will see you next week.